the internet, but clearly did not dig far enough to find a commercial that I so vividly remember. So you're just gonna have to deal with me telling you about it. And if someone remembers it or is a better internet sleuth, please let me know. So in this commercial, what happened was there were a couple people outside and they were just asking people to come up to this giant wall that was set up behind them that was painted all black, and they gave them a paint roller on a stick, and along the side of it they kind of marked by decades and ages all the way up. And so they asked people this question: when did you start saving for retirement? And the people would take the paint roller and put a dash at the approximate age of when they started saving for retirement. And then they asked the people a second question, which was, when do you wish you had started saving for retirement? And typically the people would move that roller way down on the line and put another dash. And then they would fill in the gap in the space between. And so by the end of the commercial, you had seen all of these people go up and draw these dashes, these vertical lines showing the difference between when they started saving for retirement and when they wish they would have. And some of the lines were short, but a lot of them were on the longer side of things. And so this is this idea, right, that finance people understand deeply, is that the variable that exists is predictive. And the variable isn't about how much you put in towards your retirement, how much you put into your savings. It's all about the time that you can leave it alone to do its work. In fact, there's been this trend going around where people are talking about, if you hadn't bought new iPhones, but instead invested that same amount of money into Apple stocks, how much money would you have today? So there have been 24 generations of iPhone to this day. And so instead of buying each iPhone as they came out, if you had taken that same money you would have spent and invested it in Apple stocks, today in your bank account, you would have $147,000. 133 of that would be pure profit. Now, as someone who has quite a drawer of old iPhones herself, and married someone who uses the green bubble one, the green bubble people, you could actually like rub it into us more by taking that money, that difference between what you spend on your Google phone or your Android or whatever it may be, for the difference of an iPhone, and put that away, and then tell me later how much more money I could have had towards my retirement. Okay, please and thank you. Do that experiment for me. But all of this idea is all based around the idea of what I'm sure you know about, of compound interest, right? The longer you don't touch money and let it do its thing, and a thing that is saving interest for you, the more that that money is going to earn and make you. Did you know that Albert Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world? There's something of a miracle that happens in compound interest. It's a phrase that often gets associated in titles of YouTube videos or articles when people begin talking about this idea. And I think what we're getting at under this idea of compound interest is actually something about kingdom building. It's something about the way that God works, that maybe it starts with something small, like opening a fund to invest for your kid to go to college or start their life off when they fly the nest. Something small and faithful that is invested in over time and left alone to do the work can become like the mustard seed. It can be something so small that it seems like, how could this have an impact? But yet by the end, it does. You remember that one line verse, the parable, right? Found in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 17. And in the verse, it goes like this. It's so packed. Because you have little faith, he said, I assure you that you have the faith of the size of a mustard seed. You could say to this mountain, go from here to there, and it will go. There will be nothing you can't do. There's something powerful in the work of trusting God with something so small and seeing what might happen, the impact that it might bring. So welcome to the interactive portion of the sermon today, because I want to exemplify this in our midst, because I know you've experienced it in your life. So I'd like you to raise your hand. Raise your hand if you've had a teacher or a professor that was influential in your life. Yeah, just about every hand in the room went up. So now, if you're a teacher or a professor, would you stand up? Yeah, that's right. You heard me. I said interactive portion. Okay, look at all of these amazing people we have in our midst. And so I have a question just for you who are standing. Did you think there's been a moment in your career where someone decades later would sit in a room and raise their hand and say that you did something impactful in their life? Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. You can sit down. Let me show you the expression that I could see from up here. Like there's this like little bit of like, I want to believe that I have this impact. And I know that so many of you that were standing up have had even people tell you that they've been impacted by your teaching, by your influence in their lives. And yet you're still like, I don't know if I make that much of an impact. So now I have another question for everyone in the room, which is this: is there someone in your faith journey that has had an impact, an influence in your life? If so, raise your hand. Now, keep your hand raised if that person is in the room. Yeah. Look how many people's hands are raised. If you really want to be brave, if the person's closest to you, or if you want to be loud, tell that person to stand up. Poke at them, point at them, right? You're like, yeah, go ahead. Look, we've made one person do it. Yeah, stand up. You heard your names. Mike Ford, I saw you're being pointed at. Me, okay, I'm being pointed at. On and on. Look, this is me. They're like, no, I don't want to do this. But we know the power of when someone impacts your life. And how many times do you go back to that moment and you can't even think about what it was that they said or one thing that they did that really changed the trajectory of your life, but you know that there were all of these moments that played into it. And yet maybe out of all of those, there was one. Maybe there was this one moment, one line that felt like a throwaway line to the other person that changed the trajectory of your faith, that changed the trajectory of who you wanted to grow into being. All right, last piece of the interactive part, I promise. I need everyone to raise their hand, and you're going to keep it raised until I'm through with the question, and you're going to keep it up until I tell you you can put it down. All right, raise your hand if you have impacted somebody's life. Ooh, I feel some of you like you're like, no. All right, you can put your hands down. But that's the truth. We are so quick to undercut what we have done in other people's lives, are we not? But yet, I know you. And from who I know of you, you have made an impact on someone's life, whether you ever hear about it or not. And that is powerful. And so this power of what we do not know that the seeds that we sow, what they might grow into being. But yet there is influence and there are things that you will not know about until the other side of heaven. And so this morning, as we continue in this stewardship series, the worst stewardship series you ever heard and why it changes everything, you have heard it said, give 10%. I want to fill in the silent part, though, that goes along with that. Because there's this idea of you give a tithe, right? You give 10% back to God. The silent part that sneaks into our head that creeps in is, or give nothing, right? Because if you can't give the tithe, why would you give anything? You got to work to be able to give the 10%. And if you can't give the 10%, then well, maybe you just don't give until you reach that point. And where did this idea come from? Where does this idea of giving 10% to God come from? It's all from Mosaic covenant laws. So we're talking Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, all fun reading, right? Those were the last Bibles chapters y'all read, right? Was from one of those. Yeah, but over and over again, there's this sense of you give 10% to God. Jacob is the first one to do this in Genesis, that he says, I'm going to give 10% of all this wealth I've accumulated back to God. The other concept comes in really heavily is this idea of first fruits. You give the first of your harvest back to God, and you let God work and do with that what God will do with that. But we are a New Testament people. We no longer live by the Mosaic covenant laws, do we? And so because of that, we need to reevaluate, how are we called to give? And so to prove my point and kind of exemplify this idea of what I think God is calling us to do, I'm actually going to turn to a Mosaic covenant law for a moment for us. It's in a real fun section of Deuteronomy. It's in what's titled Rules for War and Engagement. So follow with me on the scripture reading this morning from Deuteronomy chapter 20. We're in verses 19 and 20. Now, if you have been attacking a city for some time, we have lots of experience in the room of that, right? Laying hold for a siege. All right, if you've been attacking a city for some time, fighting against it and trying to conquer it, don't destroy its trees by cutting them down with axes. You can eat from those trees. Don't cut them down. Do you think a tree of the field is some sort of warrior to be attacked by you in battle? That said, if you know that a tree is not a food-producing tree, you are allowed to destroy it, cutting it down and using it in the siege against the city that is fighting against you until it falls. This is good news for all people, me included, and you. You're like, how is that good news, Melissa? Well, let me tell you why it's good news. So a fruit tree takes 7 to 9 years before it starts producing a harvest worth taking. In fact, before that 7 to 9 year mark, anything that the tree tries to produce should be plucked by the attentive gardener. Otherwise, the tree will not be able to bear the weight of the fruit that it's growing. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, I do not like growing fruit, and neither does Texas. Texas is not a fruit growing state. But in the midst of that, I have attempted and failed, and I've watched a peach tree split in half because I didn't pluck the harvest. I have watched a lemon grow for 9 months to be worse than any store-bought lemon I could have just gone and got. Fruit trees take time. And even in the Mosaic covenant laws, there is a law about protecting what has been invested in for a long amount of time. Other trees, yes, you can use them to continue to siege and lay siege to the city. But if it produces food, if it produces fruit, you let it live. You even have spaces within the Deuteronomical code where it would tell you to build fences around them to remind people that these are the ones you don't touch. We can eat from these. It will provide for us. And so this morning, as I asked you about how you had an impact on people's lives and how you were quick to think of other people that have impacted your life and perhaps slower to receive where you have impacted others, my invitation for you is, do not cut down the fruit trees. Do not cut down the work that you do by being a faithful disciple. When you volunteer with a ministry, when you teach Sunday school class, when you usher, when you greet people, when you go out and do mission work, when you go out and love God's people just because we're called to love our neighbor, do not cut down the work of the fruit tree that is your life. Do not cut down the fruit trees of those that we build upon, those that have invested for a long time, who have fed us through their shade and nurture and seed droppings. do not cut it down. Because while it may feel fruitless, quite literally, for some time, and you wonder how on earth will this make a difference in the long term, you don't get to know that for quite some time. And it doesn't mean it's not working. This is a stewardship series that does deal with money, so I'll get there. So give to the fruit tree, give to the mustard seed, because you've heard it said, tithe or wait until you can tithe. But I say to you, grow the kingdom of Christ through every faithful investment in the mustard seed. Don't undercut the beauty of who you are and the impact you have on people's lives when you love them, when you offer them a kind word, when you offer them the story or wisdom from your own life. And don't undercut what your small gift of finances could do to grow a tree that produces fruit that we eat from for generations, even after you're gone. We're called to give cheerfully, joyfully, and with abundant hearts. So would you trust that God can use your pennies, your dollars, your 10%, whatever that is between you and God? Would you trust that God could use the mustard seed to move a mountain? Amen.